The monthly assembly of the Galactic Confederation was, as usual, a spectacular exercise in organized chaos, masquerading as civilization. Representatives from 473 species gathered in the crystalline amphitheater of Nexus Prime, their various forms of communication creating a symphony that would have driven any sane being to madness. The Zephyrians chimed in harmonic frequencies that made the air shimmer, while the collective's hive-mind representatives spoke in perfect unison, a feat that was either deeply impressive or thoroughly unsettling, depending on one's perspective. At the center of this diplomatic circus stood the ancient Vorthak prophet Kexthal, his 6 eyes swirling with the kind of manic intensity that suggested either profound wisdom or complete mental breakdown. The distinction, as with most things involving prophets, was disappointingly unclear. The third rock dwellers, Kexthal intoned, his voice carrying the weight of millennia and the enthusiasm of someone who had been saying the same thing for the past 3 centuries, will bring darkness to the stars. They are the chaos that unravels order, the storm that— Yes, very poetic, interrupted Councillor Yithvar of the Luminous Collective, her translated voice carrying the kind of polite dismissal typically reserved for senile relatives and door-to-door salespeople. But we have real concerns to address. The trade dispute between the Helion Consortium and the Void Merchants requires immediate— You mock what you do not understand? Kexthal's voice rose to a pitch that made several species' auditory organs physically retract. The bipedal flesh creatures of the Yellow Star System possess a quality that defies all logic. They do not surrender, they do not submit. They adapt and overcome through means that would horrify any civilized mind. The assembled delegates exchanged what passed for knowing glances among their various species. The Zephyrians' crystalline forms flickered with amusement frequencies, while the energy-based luminals pulsed in patterns that roughly translated to, "Here we go again." Commander Feles of the Hegemony Defense Force, whose species had perfected the art of looking perpetually constipated, leaned forward with the expression of someone about to explain something very simple to someone very stupid. Prophet, the humans, assuming that's who you're referring to, have barely achieved interstellar travel. They're still using chemical propulsion and fusion reactors. By our calculations, they won't pose any meaningful threat for at least another 1,000 years, if ever. Their technology is irrelevant. Kexthal's voice cracked with the strain of being the only sane person in a room full of lunatics, a role that was becoming increasingly ironic. It is their nature that makes them dangerous. They are the species that looks at an impossible situation and asks, "How can we make this work?" rather than, "Why should we try?" The laughter that followed was the kind of polite, unified dismissal that only a room full of superior beings could produce. It was the sound of 473 species simultaneously patting themselves on the back for being so much more evolved than some primitive rock dwellers who had only just figured out how to leave their own solar system. Meanwhile, roughly 47 light-years away, Commander Vex Kowalski was discovering that the universe had a sense of humor, and it wasn't particularly funny. "Ma'am, the hyperdrive is making that noise again," reported Lieutenant Chen from the engineering station of the exploration vessel Defiant. The noise in question sounded like a dying whale having an argument with a garbage disposal, which was actually an improvement from last week's screaming banshee caught in a blender symphony. "Define that noise," Vex replied, though she knew exactly which noise he meant. The Defiant's hyperdrive had 17 different concerning sounds, and the crew had learned to distinguish between them with the kind of precision usually reserved for wine tasters or explosives experts. "The one that means we're about to drop out of hyperspace whether we want to or not, Mum." "Wonderful." Vex rubbed her temples, a gesture that had become so frequent it was practically a nervous tic. "How long until we can get back to normal space without exploding?" "Approximately 3 minutes, Ma'am. Maybe 4 if we're lucky." "We're never lucky, Chan." As if summoned by her words, the Defiant shuddered out of hyperspace with all the grace of a drunk elephant attempting ballet. The view screen flickered to life, revealing a sight that made Vex's heart sink, and her tactical instincts scream simultaneously. They were surrounded by ships. Not just any ships. Alien ships that made the Defiant look like a child's toy made from scrap metal and wishful thinking. Which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate. "Incoming transmission," reported Communications Officer Torres, her voice carrying the kind of careful neutrality that suggested she was either very professional or very scared. Possibly both. The main screen flickered, and suddenly they were looking at what appeared to be a crystalline Christmas tree ornament with too many eyes and a serious superiority complex. "Greetings, primitive vessel," the alien said in perfectly translated English, somehow managing to make greetings sound like "you poor, pathetic creature. I am Counselor Zephyr of the Galactic Confederation. You have entered restricted space. Please prepare to be escorted to the nearest processing facility for integration assessment." Vex blinked. "Integration assessment, yes. As a newly discovered species, you will be evaluated for your potential contribution to galactic civilization. Based on your current technological level, you will likely be assigned to agricultural or mining duties. Under the guidance of more advanced species, the bridge of the Defiant fell silent, except for the gentle hum of life support systems and the distant sound of Chen muttering what sounded like very creative profanity in 3 different languages. "I'm sorry," Vex said with the kind of careful politeness that her crew recognized as a warning sign, "but did you just tell us we're going to be assigned jobs? Not assigned, guided. The Confederation exists to help lesser species achieve their maximum potential within the greater galactic community. Your species shows promise, but clearly requires supervision to avoid the mistakes that plague primitive civilizations." Lieutenant Torres leaned over and whispered, "Ma'am, are they seriously trying to give us a performance review?" "It appears so," Vex replied, her voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded either enlightenment or extreme violence. "Counselor Zephyr, I appreciate your offer, but humanity has a long-standing policy regarding unsolicited guidance, which is, thanks but no thanks." The crystalline alien's multiple eyes seemed to refocus simultaneously, creating an effect that was either deeply meaningful or mildly nauseating. "I do not believe you understand. This is not a request. Integration is mandatory for all newly discovered species. It is for your own good." "Ah," Vex nodded, with the kind of understanding that suggested the situation was about to become significantly more complicated. "There's the problem. You see, humans have this thing about being told what's for our own good. We tend to react poorly to it. Your reaction is irrelevant. You will comply or be relocated to a more suitable environment for your development." The bridge crew exchanged glances that conveyed volumes about their collective opinion of being relocated by Christmas tree ornaments with delusions of grandeur. "Counselor," Vex said, her voice taking on the tone of someone explaining a very simple concept to a very slow child, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. We're not looking for guidance, integrity, or relocation. We're exploring. It's what we do. Exploration without proper supervision is dangerous and inefficient. The Confederation has protocols. The Confederation can take its protocols and—" "Ma'am," Torres interrupted urgently, "we're receiving multiple incoming transmissions. It looks like more of our ships." The view screen split to show 5 more human vessels dropping out of hyperspace in various states of mechanical distress. The colony ship Perseverance materialized with what appeared to be half its hull held together by prayer and industrial adhesive. The heavy cruiser Indomitable emerged trailing plasma like a wounded comet. The explorer vessel Wanderer simply appeared with a flash of light and a sound like reality apologizing for the inconvenience. "This is Captain Morrison of the Perseverance," crackled over the comm. "Vex, please tell me you know why we're surrounded by angry Christmas decorations." "They want to give us jobs, Morrison." "What kind of jobs?" "The kind we don't want." "Ah. Standard response then. I think that would be appropriate." Counselor Zephyr's crystalline form flickered with what might have been confusion, or the alien equivalent of a migraine. "You are communicating with additional vessels of your species. This was not anticipated." "Yeah, we tend to travel in groups." Captain Morrison's voice carried the kind of casual indifference that suggested he was either very brave or very stupid. "Safety in numbers and all that. Speaking of which, Vex, the Determination just signaled they're 15 minutes out, and the Relentless is right behind them." "Relentless?" Zephyr's voice carried a note of concern that was both surprising and oddly satisfying. "It's just a name," Vex said with the kind of innocent tone that fooled absolutely no one. "We're not very creative with ship names. We also have vessels called Defiant, Indomitable, Perseverance, and Wanderer. I'm sensing a pattern, but I can't quite put my finger on it." Back on Nexus Prime, the monthly assembly had devolved into something resembling organized panic, which was actually a significant improvement over the usual organized chaos. 8 human vassals, reported Defense Coordinator Malthar, his forearms gesturing frantically at the holographic display. "All armed, all refusing to comply with standard integration protocols." "Armed with what?" asked Councillor Yithvar. her voice carrying the kind of professional concern that suggested she was beginning to take the situation seriously. Chemical explosives, kinetic projectiles, and what appears to be improvised plasma weapons. Improvised? They seem to have modified their industrial equipment into weapons. Their mining lasers are now classified as uncomfortably destructive, and their construction drones have been enhanced. In the corner of the chamber, Kexthal's 6 eyes swirled with the kind of manic intensity that suggested either vindication or complete mental breakdown. Did I not warn you? Did I not speak of the darkness they carry? They're hardly darkness, HFY replied with the kind of dismissive confidence that was becoming increasingly strained. They're just stubborn. Stubborn? Kexthal's laugh was the sound of sanity finally giving up and going home. They have turned farming equipment into weapons of war. They have named their ships after concepts that should terrify any rational mind. They do not retreat, they do not negotiate, they do not surrender, they simply ask, how can we make this work? And then proceed to make it work in ways that violate every principle of civilized warfare. Civilized warfare has rules, Malthar pointed out with the kind of logic that suggested he was missing something important. Exactly my point. Meanwhile, aboard the Defiant, the situation was rapidly approaching what military strategists classified as completely insane, with subcategories of gloriously insane and probably shouldn't have done that. Councillor Zephyr, Vex said with the kind of patience typically reserved for dealing with particularly slow children or bureaucrats. I'm going to explain this one more time. Humanity appreciates your offer to help us achieve our maximum potential. We really do. But we have a different approach to reaching our potential, which is, we figure it out as we go. The crystalline alien's form flickered with what might have been confusion or the beginning of a nervous breakdown. That is inefficient, maybe. But it's our inefficiency. The Confederation has protocols for dealing with non-compliant species. I bet you do. Would you like to hear about humanity's protocols for dealing with species that threaten our independence? You cannot threaten the Confederation. We have ships that dwarf your entire fleet. We have weapons that could sterilize your homeworld. We have technologies that you cannot even comprehend. That's nice. We have something too. What? We have nothing left to lose and absolutely no idea when to quit. The silence that followed was the kind of profound quiet that suggested either deep contemplation or the calm before a storm of truly epic proportions. Mum, Torres whispered, the Confederation fleet is powering up weapons. Are they now? Vex smiled, with the kind of expression that her crew had learned to associate with either brilliant tactical disasters. Chen, what's the status on our mining charges? Fully loaded, man, all 600,000 tons of them. And our construction drones? Armed and ready, ma'am. The boys in engineering got creative. Councillor Zephyr, Vex said pleasantly, you mentioned that you have ships that dwarf our entire fleet. That's probably true. You mentioned that you have weapons that could sterilize our home world. That's concerning. You mentioned that you have technologies we cannot comprehend. That's likely accurate. Then you understand the futility of resistance. Oh, I understand something all right. I understand that you're about to learn why the rest of the galaxy is going to remember this day as the moment everything changed. You speak in riddles. No, I speak in human. There's a difference. The Defiant's engines flared to life with the kind of sound that suggested either incredible power or imminent explosion. Around them, the other human vessels began moving in patterns that violated every principle of space combat that the Confederation had ever encountered. What are they doing? Malthar's voice crackled over the comm from Nexus Prime, carrying the kind of professional concern that suggested he was beginning to realize that someone had made a terrible mistake. They're not following any recognizable tactical doctrine, reported Fleet Commander Vixstar from the Confederation flagship. They're spreading out in a pattern that leaves them vulnerable to concentrated fire, but also makes it impossible to engage them all simultaneously. Makes no sense. Exactly, which is why it's working. The first human ship to engage was the Perseverance, which approached the Confederation fleet with the kind of determined trajectory that suggested its pilot had either nerves of steel or a complete disregard for personal safety. Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the comm with the kind of casual indifference that suggested he was either very brave or very insane. This is Captain Morrison to all Confederation vessels. You have 60 seconds to withdraw from this system before we demonstrate why humanity doesn't do well with ultimatums. You cannot be serious. Councillor Zephyr's voice carried the kind of incredulous disbelief that suggested reality was becoming negotiable. You are outnumbered 50 to 1. Yeah, that does seem unfair. Morrison replied thoughtfully. You should probably call for reinforcements. What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for the next 1,000 years. Assuming there were any military academies left to study it, the Perseverance opened fire with what appeared to be its entire cargo bay, launching a cloud of mining charges that spread across space like a deadly constellation. The Confederation fleet, expecting conventional weapons, found itself facing 600,000 tons of industrial explosives that had been enhanced by human engineering. Evasive maneuvers, Fleet Commander Vixstar shouted, but the Confederation ships had been designed for battles against civilized opponents who followed recognizable tactical doctrines. They were not designed to deal with enemies who treated the laws of physics as suggestions and the concept of appropriate force as a foreign language. The mining charges detonated in a sequence that turned local space into a light show that would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. Confederation shields, designed to deflect energy weapons and kinetic projectiles, proved remarkably ineffective against explosions that simply refused to behave according to established principles of space combat. Impossible, Vixstar whispered as his flagship's shields fluctuated under the assault. Those are mining charges. They shouldn't be able to penetrate military-grade shielding. They're not trying to penetrate the shields, his tactical officer reported, with the kind of professional bewilderment that suggested the universe had stopped making sense. They're detonating around us in a pattern that creates resonance cascade failures. That's not a real tactical doctrine. Tell that to our shields, sir. They're failing. Around them, the other human vassals had begun their own attacks, each one employing tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. The Indomitable was using its construction drones as guided missiles, each one packed with enough explosives to level a small city. The Wanderer was employing what appeared to be modified trash compactors as kinetic weapons, launching compressed metal cubes at velocities that turned them into relativistic projectiles. This is madness. Councillor Zephyr's voice carried the kind of desperate disbelief that suggested someone was having a very bad day. You're using industrial equipment as weapons of war. We're using whatever works, Vex replied with the kind of casual indifference that suggested she was either completely insane or completely sane, depending on one's perspective. That's what humans do, we adapt, but the risk is ours to take. The Defiant's next salvo consisted of what appeared to be the ship's entire supply of spare parts, launched at maximum velocity. Nuts, bolts, metal plating, and what looked like someone's lunch tray spread across space in a cloud of debris that turned the area around the Confederation fleet into a navigational nightmare. They're shooting garbage at us, Vixstar reported with the kind of professional incredulity that suggested his training had not prepared him for this particular scenario. Is it working? Unfortunately, yes. Our navigation systems can't plot safe courses through the debris field, and our weapons can't get target locks through the interference. Back on Nexus Prime, the assembly had devolved into what could charitably be called panic, and more accurately described as the kind of chaos that makes regular chaos look organized. 17 Confederation vessels damaged, Maltha reported with the kind of professional dismay that suggested his day was not going according to plan. 3 completely disabled. The humans are... They're what? Yithvar demanded. They're winning. In the corner of the chamber, Kekstool's 6 eyes had achieved a state of manic intensity that suggested either profound vindication or complete mental breakdown. Did I not warn you? Did I not speak of the darkness they carry? This isn't darkness, Yithvar protested, with the kind of desperate logic that suggested she was losing an argument with reality. This is just unconventional. Unconventional? Kekstool's laugh was the sound of prophecy finally being taken seriously. They have turned the very concept of warfare into something unrecognizable. They do not fight to win, they fight to survive. They do not seek victory, they seek the next battle. They are the storm that consumes order and leaves chaos in its wake. Surely they can't sustain this kind of assault indefinitely, can't they? They have named their ships after concepts that should terrify any rational mind. Defiant, Indomitable, Perseverance, Relentless. These are not the names of a species that knows when to quit. As if summoned by his words, the tactical display lit up with new contacts. More human ships were dropping out of hyperspace, each one arriving with the kind of dramatic timing that suggested either incredible luck or a complete disregard for personal safety. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Determination," crackled over the comm. "Sorry we're late to the party. What did we miss?" "We are demonstrating why humans don't do well with ultimatums," Vex replied, with the kind of casual indifference that suggested she was either completely insane or completely sane. "Ah, standard response, then. Chen, load the mining charges." "Ma'am, we used all the mining charges." "Then load the construction equipment." "Ma'am, we used all the construction equipment." "Then load whatever's left." "Ma'am, all we have left is the emergency food supplies and the backup toilet paper." "Load it." "Ma'am, you heard me. If we're going down fighting, even if we have to throw bathroom supplies at them." The Confederation fleet, meanwhile, was discovering that fighting humans was like trying to hold back the tide with a strongly worded letter. Every time they adapted to one tactic, the humans would employ something completely different and equally impossible. "They're using their waste disposal systems as weapons," Vicstar reported with the kind of professional bewilderment that suggested his training had not covered this particular scenario. "How is that possible?" "They've modified their sewage processing plants into high-pressure projectile launchers. They're literally shooting, I don't want to know, compressed organic matter at our ships." "I said I don't want to know." The battle, if it could be called that, continued for another 3 hours. By the end, the Confederation fleet had been reduced to a scattered collection of damaged vessels trying to escape from an enemy that refused to follow any recognizable pattern of behavior. "Counselor Zephyr," Vex's voice crackled over the comm with the kind of polite formality that suggested the conversation was over. "I believe we've reached what humans call an understanding. You cannot have won. This is impossible. We didn't win. We just didn't lose. There's a difference. The Confederation will send reinforcements. We have fleets that will face the same problem you just faced. You see, Counselor, you made a fundamental error in your calculations." "Which was?" "You assumed we were rational." The comm went dead, leaving the Confederation fleet alone in space with their damaged ships and their shattered assumptions about how civilized species were supposed to behave. Back on Nexus Prime, the assembly had fallen into the kind of stunned silence that suggested everyone was either deep in thought or having a collective nervous breakdown. "The sky has turned black," Kexthul whispered, his 6 eyes swirling with the kind of manic intensity that suggested either profound wisdom or complete insanity, not with ships or weapons, but with the realization that everything we thought we knew about the universe was wrong. "They're just one species," Yithvar said weakly. "Surely they can't." "They can, and they will, because they are the species that looks at an impossible situation and asks, how can we make this work? And then they make it work in ways that violate every principle of civilized behavior. So what do? We learn, we adapt, we pray to whatever gods we believe in that they never decide we're a threat to their independence. And if they do?" Kexthul's laugh was the sound of prophecy finally being understood. "Then we discover what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object, and the unstoppable force decides to go around, under, over, and through the object simultaneously, while setting it on fire and using the smoke signals to communicate with reinforcements." In the depths of space, the human fleet regrouped around their damaged vessels. They had won, sort of. They had survived, definitely. They had demonstrated that humanity's approach to diplomacy was roughly equivalent to a natural disaster, with a sense of humor. "So," Captain Morrison's voice crackled over the comm, "what now?" "Now we go home," Vex replied, with the kind of satisfaction that suggested a job well done. "And we make sure everyone knows that humanity is open for business, but we're not accepting management positions." "Think they'll leave us alone?" "For now. They'll be back eventually. They always are. And when they come back, we'll be ready. We always are." The human fleet began its journey home, leaving behind a confederation that would never again underestimate the species from the third rock around an ordinary yellow star. The prophecy had been fulfilled, the sky had turned black, and the universe had learned that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one that doesn't know when to quit. In the end, the aliens had been right about one thing: humanity was indeed a species that defied all logic. They just hadn't realized that this wasn't a weakness to be corrected, but a strength to be feared. And now, as they watched the human ships disappear into the darkness of space, they understood that the real darkness wasn't the absence of light, it was the presence of a species that refused to accept that anything was impossible. The galaxy would never be the same, and somewhere in the depths of space, humanity was just getting started.